And so that's what I've tried to do today. I'm going to focus on two ideas that have come to the fore in the last 3 or 4 years. One is the notion of career literacy, and the other is how we can use mobility to enhance our career potential. And what I want to do is convince you that a goal for the PhD, whether or not it's a program goal, it should at least be a PhD participant or post-PhD graduate, should be their goal to become career literate and think about how to use mobility to enhance their career potential. So what I'm going to do is begin by using a few slides to kind of situate these two ideas, because they've emerged from the work we've been doing over the last 15 years. And then I'll go on to talk more about those two things and how different forms of mobility that we often don't think about, and also a strategy for how you can think about mobility in terms of career potential. And then I'd like you to be thinking during this what implications there might be for you in thinking about your career or someone else's career. And I have a handout which Kay is going to post in the chat. You don't need to look at the handout now, but what I've done there is I've provided a sort of a brief historical context for how our research has got to where it is now. Then I've provided two quite in-depth accounts we've studied over 200 people over the last 15 years. And there are two accounts of people who are similar in some ways. And you'll see I described that. But I'm going to refer to them during my presentation. You needn't read them beforehand, but you might want to go back later on and go, oh yes, I see. And then I've included some references and finally some of the key ideas from these slides. So to get started, in our view, we have to always be thinking about careers within a broader context. And this notion that life and work are interacting in career decision-making. So whenever we're thinking about careers, we have to be thinking about our or the individual's biography, where in their life course they are, the history, what historical time are they situated in, and what locations are involved, geographical locations. And so for us, the key element is this notion of life course, that everything in the past, the present, and the future continues to inform the present and future hopes and intentions and experiences. And work is embedded within this life experience. We can't think about work without thinking about life. And just as life is evolving, work contexts and structures in and out of academia are also evolving. And these are creating affordances and constraints for the kinds of jobs that exist and the kinds of jobs that are attractive to PhDs and PhD graduates. So an important thing in thinking about these contexts, because we try to analyze them to make sense of them, what are the factors, is that they're not just evolving, but analytically we can think of micro, meso, macro factors. And that can help us in our analysis and in terms of being career literate, where are the forces coming from? And I'll give you some examples of these contexts in a minute. And so these are all interacting, they're evolving, life experience, work context, and career thinking. So that's kind of the big picture of the conceptual framework we're using for thinking about careers. And I want to break down this life and context more specifically to give you some examples of the kinds of factors that come into play. So if we think about life factors, these are the things we have to be remembering if we're trying to be career literate, is to appreciate and assess the life factors and the context factors and their interactions. So these, I'm sure, will be familiar to you if you think about your own life. So your life and career intentions and goals, of course, are important because part of trying to have a career is being agentive in different ways. And one of the things I think that's really interesting is a lot of our work shows how life and career intentions often overlap. So a desire to co-locate, you've got life and career intentions overlapping there when you have two partners who want to be working in relatively the same place. Aligned life work values come into play because they'll influence the kinds of sectors or organizations that might hold the jobs that you would be interested in having. Financial security is also important, but it varies greatly as to how people think about it. Some people just need enough to live on. Some see it as permanence, like not having to worry about the check coming in. And some people, when they have children, start to be thinking about it in a different way, like benefits, those kinds of things for children. So that's why family becomes very important. And work-life balance, of course, and there's loads of literature about work-life balance being a challenge in the academic arena and a lack of well-being. We also are aware of that being an issue. And as I said, past experience. And I've given you two examples here of how past experience can influence the kinds of sectors that people are looking in, or the degree to which they have found mobility to be something that's functional, that they can use well. So those are interacting amongst themselves, and then we have contexts. So here I've given a few examples of the factors in the macro context. So that, of course, we're all living with inflation right now. If you're in the UK or Europe, you're living with Brexit, probably less so if you're living on some other continent, but you've probably heard of it and begun to see how it's influencing things. And then, of course, the labor sector, because those vary in their missions, what drives them, the degree to which profit becomes really an important issue for the organization. If we think of the meso level, then we begin to see that organizations vary. They can vary in their size, their mission, their values, their goals. And those two interact so that meso is influenced by the macro, but both of those are influencing the micro, which is what we do when we go to work. What's happening to us? Are we happy? Are we contented? And here you can see that unhappiness may increase mobility, avoiding an unhappy circumstance, but satisfaction will continue to keep people there. So what you're trying to do is to, in being career literate, is to think about how are these factors in the macro level. We're often more aware of the micro ones than the meso and macro, and the life factors, they're all interacting. How are they helping us to understand what it is that the opportunities are? So to me, that's an important part of thinking about career literacy, is to recognize and assess these interacting factors to approximate life-career intentions. So that's kind of the bigger picture of how we've been thinking about and approaching the notions of career literacy and mobility. And I want to now think about, and you might, before I start to talk, think, what kinds of mobility am I aware of? Because in the academic arena, we've very much, at least in the research, focused on the fact that people may be geographically mobile, and that often has advantages, and people may seek it. But there are many, many other forms of mobility that we can consider in relation to career potential. So I hope now you've come up with a few examples in your head of types of mobility. And so now what I want to do is, first of all, make the point that considering mobility doesn't mean you have to move. It means you have to think, is moving a good idea or is staying put a good idea? But when you're thinking about moving or not moving, that's when you have to think, what are all the mobility options? Maybe some are not even worth considering, others are possibilities. So I'm going to show you the ones we have found so far in our research. There's external geographical, which I think most people sort of just are obviously aware of. So it can be within and across regions, country, other countries. It can be within and across labor sectors. So you need not change the labor sector, or you may. I think the most important thing, and the thing that makes this particularly challenging, is it requires physically moving home. So this can be a major disruption if you have partners and you want to co-locate, or you have children, etc. Then we can think about external local, which we tend maybe less to think about. It can be within or across organizations, within or across labor sectors, and it doesn't require moving home. So that kind of reduces the pressures in one's life. It maybe gives more flexibility in choosing an option. And then we often don't think about the fact that we can move internally in an organization in many different ways. And we can influence this, but the organization itself, the way it is structured and may change, will also influence it. So individuals can move within an organization through promotion, applying for a different role, taking different kinds of leave. It could be education leave or family leave, whatever. But then we have to think about the organizational structures. So a change of owner could lead to a change of role, which you might not have much option about other than to leave the organization. There could be a change in mission, and there could be the creation of a new unit. And when you read Grant's story later on, you'll see that one of the things that was to his advantage was a change in the mission of the organization he was working in that led to him undertaking another form of mobility. And this could include a geographical move, which in Grant's case, you will see that happened. And there are also some other kind of variants I'd like to mention. One is we often think long-term, but it could be short-term. It could be just for a period of weeks or a few months. And it can be temporary or sustained. So we can think of like, I'm going to go do my PhD for this amount of time. So you're thinking of it as temporary because you don't know where you'll be afterwards. Or it can be sustained, which is when someone's working a hybrid career. They're working in two different organizations in different roles at the same time. And you'll see Regina is an example of that she has a sustained movement back and forth between two different organizations and different roles. And of course, all of these are time and location sensitive. So what does this mean then in terms of thinking about mobility as a strategy? So to me, if we think of it as a strategic career tool, first of all, it's assessing all the relevant interactions. It's recognizing increasing power asymmetry. So you may have more control to change the conditions of your work at the micro level than you do at the meso level as you navigate with people. So for instance, it may be easier to change your work hours by talking to your supervisor. And so that will satisfy whatever your concerns are at the time, or to take on some new role or task to develop your skills. The meso level, it may give you some affordances and constraints. So in Grant's case, there was an intent for international profile that emerged, and that helped him. In Regina's case, the organization hadn't had people working in the kind of job she was hired into, but they needed her kind of expertise. So she was able to take advantage of that. And we see many examples, particularly like if you think about state visa requirements, many people in the global south have great difficulty traveling because of state visa requirements coming to Europe or North America. If you think in Europe, there are mobility support policies that make it easy for people to move across countries, take jobs, whatever. And the thing we found in our recent research is that people assess these factors differently in different times and places, and they assess them in different ways. And I've referenced in a handout the article that talks about that. So after assessing, then you consider if mobility is an option and how mobility could be an option to help approximate life career intentions. And as I said, when the factors are constraining, mobility may be the very best option. So I hope I've given you enough of the context to say why I think a goal of the PhD should be career literate with mobility potential. So the idea is you have a broad and realistic knowledge of opportunity structures so you can navigate. You have learned how to explore and analyze the varied influences on your job opportunities. You recognize that the decisions you're making now are time and location sensitive and will be different in a few years, which is why it's good to have more than one career in mind when you're doing your PhD. You view mobility as a career strategy, like how can I use different forms of mobility to advance? And you're able to accurately assess your own abilities and preferences. So you also have to be thinking, what can you offer? Where would you need to develop some things that you don't presently have? And my kind of collective interpretation from what we've seen from our results is that with this knowledge, you'll be more open to a range of careers in light of what you want to achieve. And also you can imagine how to adapt to future possibilities because you see where the markets are changing and evolving. And so, as I said to you at the beginning, I hope that you come away with some idea from this that you could use in thinking about your career or thinking about other people's careers. And that's it. And thank you.